You're listening to Economics Detective Radio. Before we start, let me give a quick disclaimer that although today's guest is a politician, this show is nonpartisan and doesn't endorse any particular candidate for office. My guest and I are also Canadian, so we'll be talking about some Canada-specific issues. I know I have an international audience, but sometimes it's fun to learn about what's going on in other countries, so I hope you'll listen nonetheless. And now, on to the episode. My guest today is Maxime Bernier. He is the Member of Parliament for Beauce, Quebec, and a contender for the Conservative Party leadership race. Maxime, welcome to Economics Detective Radio.
Thank you very much for having me.
So our topic today will be Canada's economy and its economic policy. There's a lot to get on this topic, but let's start with the positive. So the Fraser Institute's Economic Freedom of the World Index ranks Canada as the fifth freest country in the world, actually tied for fifth. We're well ahead of our neighbors, the Americans, who come in at number 16. So to start our discussion, Maxime, what is Canada doing right with respect to its economic policy?
First of all, I think that this was the ranking that the Fraser Institute did a year ago, if I remember very well. And at that time, we had a balanced budget when we were in government. And also, we were successful to lower taxes to every Canadian. And I think that's the key. When you speak about more freedom, you must also have less government and a limited government in Ottawa. And I think that was the goal of the Conservative government when we were in government. But yes, and also we have a lot of free trade. That's very important. We signed more than free trade agreements with 40, I think if my memory is good, 45 countries. So when you have more free trade like that, Canadians are able to buy goods from every country, and they are able also to export products. So that's helping also more free trade, less government, lower taxes. And I think that's a big reason why we are there now.
Yeah, there's a pretty general economic freedom. And of course, you mentioned that ranking came out last year, and we have had a change of government recently, so we'll see if we can keep our high position. But let's move on to some specific areas where we're not so free. Let's start with telecommunications. So Canadians have some of the most expensive cell phone bills in the world. You personally did some work in deregulating the telecommunications sector when you were industry minister in 2006, 2007. Can you talk a little bit about the changes that happened then and where we are now?
Yeah, at that time we wanted to deregulate the telecom industry, mostly the regulation that was imposed by the CRTC. So we were successful to do that. And after that, I think we had a little bit more competition in Canada in telecom. But we didn't have time also to abolish the restriction on foreign investment in telecommunication. And so I think that would be the next step to do for having a little bit more competition. And so that's why in my program, I have a very strong platform about deregulating and also abolishing foreign investment in telecom and in the aviation sector also. So like that, corporation from outside Canada will be able to invest here in telecom, and that will help Canadian consumers will have more choices and lower prices. But it was the deregulation that I did when I was industry minister was, if I can say like that, the first part of the deregulation. So now we must go ahead with abolishing foreign investment in telecom.
Right. So yeah, we're right. The vast majority of Canadians live right on the border with the United States. And if you just, take you step across the border, suddenly, you can buy a data plan for much less. The one thing I was struck by visiting the United States was that people will just watch YouTube videos, when they're on their mobile data, and you don't see that in Canada because it's so incredibly expensive. And yeah, so I wouldn't be surprised if we allow the American companies to sell to us if we wouldn't get exactly the same plan they're getting. which would be great. You mentioned airlines. Oh, yeah. So go on. Do you have something to say?
I just want to add, like Verizon, I think they wanted to come to Canada, but they were not able. They had created a Canadian corporation and all that, and at the end they decided not to come to Canada like their operation in the U.S. So that I think that will be a big step if we are successful to abolish the restriction on foreign investment. That will make a difference for Canadian consumers.
So we have a similar issue with the airlines. It's very, very expensive to make a domestic flight within Canada. For instance, flying Vancouver to Toronto is about twice as much as flying LA to New York, even though there are similar distances. So do you want to comment on that situation? We only have the two airlines, WestJet and Air Canada. Could that be similarly fixed?
Yes, you're absolutely right. But if you want to fly from Canada to another country, it is still competitive. But if you want to fly in Canada, inside the country, from example, Montreal to Toronto or other cities like that, it is very expensive because, like you said, we have only two main carriers in Canada, WestJet and Air Canada. And we don't have, like other countries, a low-cost carrier. So we need to have one. And I know that some business entrepreneurs want to create one low-cost carrier. But their funding, their capital is coming from the U.S. and from U.K. And you still have the same thing in aviation. We have a restriction on foreign investment coming from other countries. So that's why we must abolish that. And like that, we'll have a low-cost carrier, and that will compete against Air Canada and also WestJet. That will, as you know, more competition, more choice, and at the end, lower prices. So I know that the federal government and the Minister of Transport, they are looking at it right now because these entrepreneurs want to create that corporation, low-cost carrier, and they're ready for that. So they're looking at it right now. So I hope they will abolish that, but I'm not so sure. So it is why, for me, I have a platform that is based on more freedom and less government, and it would be always good for Canadians. So it is why I'm pushing that very hard. I wrote to the minister about that to be sure that they will abolish foreign investment in foreign restriction in investment in the aviation sector. I don't know if they will do it, but if not, I will do it when I'll be the leader of the party and prime minister.
Yeah, well, I hope you succeed in that. This one's a particularly important one because if airfare is expensive, then more people drive, and driving is statistically much more dangerous, so you have more highway fatalities. I personally drove over 1,200 kilometers to, visit family over Christmas, so I'd really love to have an option to fly cheaply, but it is just out of reach at our current airfare prices. So we have also a problem here in Canada, similar related problem we tend to create cartels in a lot of industries. And we have one set of policies called supply management that applies to poultry, dairy products, even maple syrup, which is very quintessentially Canadian, keeping these prices artificially high. So could you talk a bit about supply management for those who maybe haven't heard of it?
Yeah, supply management, it is a legal cartel and for dairy, poultry, and eggs. And like that, the producer under supply management, they are able to fix an artificially high price for these products, and they are fixing the production also. That's why it's a cartel. They're fixing the production for the Canadian market, and they are fixing the price. Every year they increase the price of these products. So I'm the only candidate for the leadership of the Conservative Party of Canada, and also the only member of Parliament who's speaking for Canadian consumers. And I want them to save $2.6 billion every year, because that's the cost of keeping that cartel. And for a family, the cost is $500 every year. So I want them to be able to buy poultry, eggs, and milk from other countries. They want to export that. But because we have a tariff at the border of 300% from products coming from other countries, to be sure that the dairy producer in Canada will be able to fix an artificially high prices for their products. So for me, it's if you believe in free market, you must abolish that. And I don't want to work for 19,000 farmers that are under supply management. I want to work with 35 million of Canadians. And I think that's the most important for me. And actually, these farmers just represent 10% of the farmers, and all the other farmers in Canada, like the beef producer and all the other farmers, are not under supply management, and they are operating in a free market. So it is not fair, and to be fair, we need to abolish that. But because they are very powerful, a special interest group, they're very powerful, and they're very well connected with the politician, they were able to keep that privilege for a very long time. And I think now it's time to speak for Canadian consumers, and that's what I'm doing. So I hope I'll be successful in that.
Yeah, I've seen... Ironically, Facebook has been serving me advertisements from the Canadian milk producers, and they their tagline or slogan is, Canadian milk is worth crying, or spilt Canadian milk is worth crying over, or something like that. And, the irony is that if they supply too much milk because of this supply management, they actually have to dump it to keep the price high. So, it's really just as simple as that, just wasting perfectly good milk and poultry. And
you are absolutely right. They cannot, if they produce too much, they cannot export their surplus because it's a subsidized milk. So that's why it's bad for them. And I want them. They're producing good products, good milk, good dairy, good poultry and eggs. And I want them to be able to export their products to other countries. And right now, under supply management, they can't, because they have the responsibility and the obligation to produce only for the Canadian market.
Yeah, there was a you mentioned the 300% border tariff on U.S. dairy. I think in the U.S. they have a different policy where they actually subsidize it and keep the price artificially low. But we had this strange situation a few years back where Canadian pizzerias were smuggling in black market mozzarella over the border and got caught, which, you shouldn't have to smuggle mozzarella cheese. If we had a free market, there'd just be one price for mozzarella cheese and you wouldn't get a benefit by smuggling it. But, you mentioned that you're really the only one calling for an end to this supply management policy. And yet, our prime minister for almost a decade, Stephen Harper, had a master's degree in economics, still has a master's degree in economics. He must have known that this policy was not good for Canadians. And most of the MPs are smart people. They must realize, but is it as simple as the cartels themselves just, making big donations and buying their way to protect this policy?
But first of all, you're right. When we were in government, that was the policy of our government to keep that cartel, that supply management system. Or the members of the Conservative Party of Canada voted in 2004 in a convention to protect these farmers. And after that, when we were in government in 2006, 2007, that was the policy of the government. So, and that was the policy of the government until the end, until 2015. And I think that, at that time, we didn't want to unplease the cartel and that special interest group. So now that, and I tried to fight for that around the cabinet table, but I was not successful. But the most important, I think now I'm able to do it. And I will ask, if I'm the leader of the Conservative Party at the end of May, I will ask the members to decide on that and to review their policy statement that they did more than 12 years ago. So, and I hope the members will abolish that, and they will believe in free markets also for producer under supply management.
Yeah, well, have the supply managed industries been pushing back against you? Have they been, taking out ads or funding your opponents? How are they trying to protect their cartel status?
But for sure, they're very. It's an important cartel in Quebec and in Ontario. And they want to do everything for Maxime Bernier not being elected. And so I think they are buying memberships to vote for the leadership of our party to be able to vote, because as you know, you need to be a member. You can, if you want to be a member and support my candidacy, you can go on my website maximebernier.com, and you'll be able to become a member for only $15. But yes, the dairy producer are working to be sure that I won't be elected. But, there's more Canadians than dairy producer. So I'm working hard to be sure to be successful, because they want to keep their privilege, and we'll see what will happen. But and it's easy for them, because I'm the only candidate who wants to abolish that, and speaking for Canadian consumers, so they can vote for all the other candidates, and they will have somebody who will support their special interest.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I hope you succeed, and you're right. There are more Canadians than supply managed firms or farmers that benefit from this particular policy. But you have this issue of the costs being dispersed. And so although there's less farmers who benefit from the cartel and from supply management, there may be a lot more motivated, per capita. So I hope you can succeed and get over that sort of public choice hurdle. But I guess my cynicism kind of says that it's an uphill battle.
Absolutely. But also, I must say that the other farmers that are not under supply management, they have a huge interest also for that cartel to be abolished, because, it's not fair for them. Each time Canada is negotiating a free trade agreement with another country, they have access, for example, the Canadian beef will have access to the other country market. But they won't have a full access, because we're not giving full access for their milk, poultry, and eggs. So at the end, they are paying a little bit for that, and they don't have the access that they would have otherwise. And they understand that. So the other farmers that are not under supply management, they have an interest to be sure that we abolish that. So that can counterbalance the special interest group.
I wonder about that, because, I mean, if beef and poultry are substitutes, then you would think that the beef producers would want their competitor to have higher prices than they do, so people would maybe buy more beef. But yeah, there is the issue of the international agreements and that. If you want, we can move on to, you've called for the privatization of Canada Post and the removal of its monopoly on letter mail. That's another area where Canadians pay more, not just for letters, but also parcels. Shipping to and from and within Canada is much more expensive than it is in the United States and other places. So could you talk about, what the legal status of Canada Post is and what shipping, both parcel shipping and regular mail are, what the legal status of both of those is?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Canada Post it is a state-owned enterprise, and I think in 2017 we must do like other countries and privatize that. They are charging a huge cost because they are not competitive, and they have a huge expenses, and they're not so efficient. So my thinking about that is it is not anymore services that Canadians need to have and services that need to be delivered by government, by an entity from the government. We have a lot of private sector post delivery, and I think that it is not anymore an essential services for Canadians. And they are using Canada Post, but with email and all that, less and less. And so we must do like in Belgium, like in UK, like in France, and privatize that, because also they're charging very high prices for their products. So if we have more competition, that will help. And at the end, that's the solution. But they want to keep that. And for me, if you want to speak for Canadian consumers, you must go ahead and do that reform. So that's my proposal.
Yeah, it's such a big issue because, in other countries that have much cheaper shipping, people are opened up to the whole global marketplace. You can, you don't have to go to your local store to buy any particular good. You can buy it online and have it shipped to you. But for Canadians, that's, you're adding $10, $15 to the price. And so there's Canadians aren't really online buying things nearly as much as for instance, our neighbors, the Americans. And when Canadians want to run online businesses and maybe, ship things to other people, to stay competitive, they often have to, drive across the border and ship from the United States because it is just so much cheaper. And Canada Post has a legal monopoly on letter mail, which is a little bit odd. Why should one particular entity, government entity, have the legal right to ship our mail? It's kind of an odd historical anomaly that we could be rid of.
And they are fixing the price also. They are, it's not the free market. It is them who are fixing the price because, like you said, they have a legal monopoly. So that's what I want to do. I want to be sure that we can have competition there.
You've also called for reducing trade restrictions within Canada. This is one of those things that is so odd, is that we're one country, 10 provinces, but we restrict many goods from being shipped within our own country across borders. So, for instance, alcohol, if you have a craft brewery or a winery in British Columbia, it's very hard to ship it to even Alberta right next door. You talk about some of the internal trade restrictions that we have in Canada?
Yes, we have a lot of them in different industries. But for me, it is a little bit a shame that after 150 years, we don't have an economic union in Canada, because that was the goal of the father of our constitution, the father of our country. They wanted to have an economic union, and we don't have that because of some restriction, legislation and regulation by provinces. So my goal is to be sure that we'll have an economic union, and to do that, it's against the Constitution. And so I want to be sure that to have a team in Ottawa of the civil servant that will look at all the regulations and the legislation that are imposing by provinces, and to bring provinces in from the court when they don't respect the Constitution. So nobody had the courage to do that, and I think it's time to do it. And that's why that would be the only solution, because, I cannot change the legislation or regulation at the provincial level. I'm at the federal level, and we must respect the Constitution. But I can assure Canadians that we'll do everything for provinces to respect the Constitution. So that's why we're going to bring a province in from the court, and the court will decide if it's constitutional or not. And I think it won't be, because it's clear in the Constitution that we must be able to sell and buy goods from any provinces in Canada. So that would be the solution, because if you ask the province to do that, they're the problem. They're not, and they cannot find a solution. So that's why every year you have a meeting with a premier at the provincial level, and they're saying, we'll abolish trade barriers and all that, and it is not happening. And they're the problem, and they're not able to do that. They want to protect their own little market, and like that, it is not good for Canadians. So we must do something at the federal level, and that's what I want to do. I want to do a strong analysis of every regulation, legislation that provinces are imposing, legislation that are against free trade, and after that, bringing them in court, and the court will decide, and at the end, I'm sure it will be unconstitutional. And maybe when you do that, in 5 years after that, you'll have a real economic union in Canada, like the father of our Constitution wanted.
Yeah, one wonders, what is even the point of having a country if you're not going to have at least free trade within your borders? That seems to be the main benefit of all confederating and joining into one country instead of being 10 smaller countries. Do you have any concluding thoughts, anything we didn't cover that you'd like to say?
But first of all, I want to thank you for giving me that opportunity to speak with your people. And if they want to know a little bit more about our economic policy, they can go on my website, maximebernier.com. Everything is there. And I'm very proud of our platform. It's a platform that is based on individual freedom, personal responsibility, respect, and fairness. And it is a platform that is based on real conservative values and Western civilization values. So if people like that, they can become a member and they can vote for me for the leadership. So, but I appreciate that you give me this opportunity, and maybe another time we can go on and speak on other economic issues.
I'd like that. My guest today has been Maxime Bernier. Maxime, thanks for being part of Economics Detective Radio.
Thank you very much, and have a nice day.
Hope you liked that episode of Economics Detective Radio. You can head on over to economicsdetective.com/Bernier, BERNIER, where we'll have a full transcript of everything we talked about, as well as links to the things we mentioned. For instance, I'll link to Maxime Bernier's website, as well as to that story about the Canadian black market mozzarella smuggling ring, which is both funny and informative about some of the odder sides of Canadian economic policy. Special thanks go to Gordon, our newest Patreon supporter. Patreon is, of course, this service that allows you to make small recurring donations to shows like this one. And people like Gordon and the others who support me are the reason I can afford to continue this show and cover ongoing costs associated with it. So thanks, Gordon, and thanks others who support Economics Detective Radio. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I hope you'll all be back next week.